And this looks like it's an outward-facing document. So if you were a driver, would you have you worked with Pelivan on developing driver policies around working with or implementing these rules?
Well, as far as I know, yeah, they have they do extensive driver training because they have a fairly large number of vehicles over several counties, and so what they do is I think they probably still do that. They have a huge annual drivers training event, basically, and they get drivers in and go through all kinds of different components of doing their jobs. So it's policies, procedures, working the equipment, you know, how do you handle different kinds of situations. So I think they're very proactive. So this, yeah, what you see here is what the public would see. It's not really the policy for the, you know, that how the agency reacts to different situations.
Right. So, and also this really focuses on lift, but you have people that have low vision or low hearing, and so are may have difficulty with other types of accessibility than lifts.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's a real point. Yeah, I mean, that would be a point that you would want to have somewhere in your information. They don't have a lot of it here, and that's something we can see in some other places. But yeah, I mean, how do you handle people with low vision, providing some kind of assistance, you know, how do you provide stop announcements, even in, you know, cutaway vans, you know, that may not have any amplified speakers or anything like that. You can still at least have a way of notifying that person, you know, where the van is along that route, you know, so they know, you know, what's coming up. And, you know, without that kind of information, it may be hard for the person to know, you know, when to get on and off the van. But it also helps keep the person kind of on track to how close they are to the area they want to stop. So that, yeah, that's something else that would be part of that internal policy and training.
So, Jennie, I was going to ask Jennie what kinds of accessibility issues or questions has she had from her riders?
Well, in our written policies, we do have you know, a pet policy as far as, you know, following the FTA regulations as far as service animal. But in, and that's kind of a fallback policy in case we, you know, in case there's an issue on the bus. But in real life, we allow everybody on the bus. And, you know, and have like the gentleman was talking about with, you know, living in a native village, the people travel with their dogs and their kids and their elders. And, you know, I'm not going to say they can't travel together. So that's what we do. We allow somebody, you know, they call up and say, I got my dog. And I said, well, you know, just make sure you can control the animal, have them on a leash. And they're like, they're fine with that. So they go.
That's great. Have you had to deal with people who have low vision and low hearing?
I think that not in a negative way. Nothing where I would have to get a policy done.
Right. I'm kind of thinking about the concept of reasonable modification or ways that when people call to use the service, you have had to tailor. How about that? Tailor the using to some of the needs that they have. Maybe it's they have a difficult time getting to the curb, or there is no curb, so you know, helping people with their groceries.
Yeah, we do door-to-door service, and so all my drivers will help everyone onto the bus and help them off. They carry their groceries, their drinking water, at least as far as their door. They're not instructed to go in at all, but they go as far as the door. And we try to accommodate. If somebody expresses an interest or a desire in one way, we really try hard to accommodate that person, including, you know, changing the vehicles if necessary. because we do have one vehicle that has a higher step. So if we know we're transporting elders, then we won't take that bus.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So this is, do we want to look at go back to the document? Neil, can we go back to the document? There we go. Let's go, we'll scroll to the top. There we go.
Right there.
Yeah. So when transits are looking at how do we implement the ADA and what do we need to tell people if they're going to use our service about accessibility, what are the things that you think are key to basically inviting people to use the service and maximizing the accessibility?
I mean, yeah, that's the, I think the key part of the whole rider's guide, how to use its service. And the first thing you really want to have in your rider's guide that you give to people is how do you actually schedule a trip? That's depending on what kind of service you're providing. If you're providing ADA paratransit, then you would be calling the day before. And so, transit systems, they have call center hours, so you can call, say between 9 and 5 or whatever the times are for calling, or, there may be other times that you can call earlier for certain other trips. But you want to have that information out, and so people know, and also how does it work, say, if you're calling on weekends. Some transit systems, for ADA paratransit, of course, there has to be some way you can call for those Monday trips. If you're doing ADA paratransit, then you have to have either like an electronic message or voicemail or something that can capture people calling in, so there doesn't have to be a live person, but some way the trips could be captured and then scheduled for that next day. But that's got to be there. That scheduling information is key for people understanding how to schedule a trip. What we get a lot of times is we get people that call and they think that any kind of transportation service should be more like a taxi service, and they will actually call here and say, I don't understand why I can't just call an hour before I need to go and the van shows up. And these
Right.
are people that are ADA paratransit users, or sometimes just demand response users. Sometimes people with disabilities will say, it's my right that I have this transportation, and why do I have to call the day before? Because people will say, it's against my rights that I have to call before when other people who don't have disabilities can call an hour before. And that's what they say. And that's not an uncommon kind of response we get for some people. So I usually have to explain what ADA paratransit is, kind of go through, the way it's set up as a public transportation. It's not taxi. It gives people, calling a day before, it gives the transit system a chance to get people on the schedule and arrange a schedule that can be operationally efficient, so people can get their rides. But if you have that kind of information out front in your rider's guide, then you would have, I think, fewer calls and complaints, but also for new riders, it would have an understanding how do you schedule that trip. So that's really important. Yeah.
It sounds like it's different depending on your service strategy too.
Exactly.
So that if you are doing a general public demand response service, that you may want to be clear about where your boundaries are and how far you go off of. Because like Jenny, she runs, as we were saying, that isn't it 60 miles between the two parts of your reservation, Jenny?
It's a little over 60 miles, and it's 3 sectors, although we're only providing transportation for 2 of the sectors, but it's like it's an hour drive to anywhere from any place. It's just the way it's laid out.
Right. Well, I was thinking about also that when you're picking people up, you're not usually just, well, you probably do drive people around in the area they're in, but they also, what is the closest like medical service center area?
Well, we have the reservation clinics in this village, in that lake, and then the other village, Vermilion. But you have to get a referral out. So you can get a referral out to either 40 miles to the town of Cook or 62 miles to the town of Virginia, or the dialysis clinic, which is 67 miles in the town of Evelyn. That's one way.
Right. So you have had, I mean, that would be another thing that you might want to have in a rider's guide, is that if people are trying to use the transit for dialysis, that you might have specific policies around people using it for dialysis. Like, we need to schedule, in advance to make sure that we can help you. More than 24 hours potentially.
Yeah.
Because you're not paratransit, so you don't have the 24-hour rule. But also, I know that with trips that are that far, that sometimes you want to be able to group those trips.
Yeah, and we're not able to provide transportation to the dialysis clinic yet. I would have to send a separate bus for that, because the bus that does the medical jobs or school or grocery shopping to the town of Virginia has to be back in time have to be back in the village by 4:30 to do the evening commuter. So the length of day that the patients have at the dialysis clinic wouldn't fit within that window.
Right.
So start a separate route.
Right. Is that's something you're working on?
Yep, I'm still working on that. I have letters of support from the health facilities in Virginia and the dialysis clinic, and so it's a long process. It's a long process, but trying to get as many partners involved in getting the rides, just a safe ride. Just a little note that something I didn't know was after dialysis treatment, that patient has a potential to actually bleed out, which is, I just want to jump into that route without giving my driver some additional training.
Yeah, they have those issues, I think, with some people when they're on dialysis, that you show up to pick up the person, the driver shows up on time, but the person coming out of dialysis, in the opinion of the medical staff there, say, they need a little more time before they actually walk to the van. So they're either feeling dizzy, they're feeling woozy, or they're just not feeling good enough to walk, and they will say, can you wait another half hour before they walk out? And that's something that around that whole dialysis trips is, there's got to be some consideration or ways that you can adjust your scheduling so that if a person's not ready to leave right at the moment of the scheduled departure, a vehicle can wait. For some transit systems, they say they can't do that. We can't wait. But, when you look at dialysis, the needs are different, so.
They are, and that's just one more supporting reason why I wouldn't be able to piggyback that route onto another one. Because you've got to have that end flexibility instead of saying, okay, we're going to piggyback it onto this other route, but it has to be back to do the commuter route at 4:30. Well, you're defeating your own program there, because you're not going to be able to always get back on time for the commuters.
Right, and I think that brings up a really important point, which is sometimes rural transit feels like you are the safety net, and so you have to be there for everybody, but you can't really be everything to everybody.
Right.
And so working with your board and your community to focus your system and then build out as you are able. And I think that is reflected also in your policies, so that making sure that in your ride guide, so that when people call you up, they are expecting to ask you for what you do, not for something else. That's for
That
sure.
doesn't stop them from asking, though. They still ask.
Yeah, I think that's a really key point because yeah, people would expect sometimes a different kind of service than you're able to provide. And the Rider's Guide should be there to kind of clarify exactly the limits of service. That's great.
Mm-hmm. So if people were trying to, maybe we could look at one of the more complex examples now. What about this?
That top one there, yeah, the first one.
The top one. The Paratransit Rider's Guide from FAST?
Fairfield.
What a great
yep,
name.
Fairfield. Yes. From FAST.
Right. They dart
and
they are fast.
Yeah, they dart and they're fast. But look at, we can start on the first page, but look at this. It's 10 pages long, so it's a bunch of stuff. But, yeah, they explain what their ADA paratransit is and their eligibility so people can understand that. So if people are even interested in this service, the Rider's Guide could be passed out at different kind of public events or at different human service agencies, and you have the information about the paratransit in one place. So including the eligibility. And a lot of times we see things where eligibility and the actual service information is separate. And that causes a lot of confusion. So people will call numbers around, their service, but they're not eligible yet. That causes confusion. All they're calling for is trying to get some eligibility for the service. But here it's one place, and also how to call for your eligibility. I think that's really good. It keeps it pretty clear. And the other thing you notice, if you look on the left side of the screen here, they have some common other languages for their area around contacting the service. So that's pretty good too. So then we want to look at the next page. But isn't that a nice way as far as I think as an introduction, it looks like this would be folded off into like mm-hmm. 4 panels or something. But it's a nice way to introduce your service.
Right, because I think people use sometimes the words paratransit and demand response sort of interchangeably, and people think about paratransit as a service strategy rather than an ADA requirement for fixed, adjunct to fixed route service. And so I think using the correct terminology really helps people understand what they're talking about. I mean, if you've got demand response service, you don't have to be eligible. You have to be alive.
Exactly. Right. Yeah.
And you have to be within the service area.
And then in a lot of transit systems, they're running a combination. I know, a lot of smaller communities, ADA paratransit vans are the same vans that are used for demand and response service. They all look exactly the same. They're not marked differently. Right. And people get confused. Right. And people will say, I want to get that ride on that paratransit van. And they're not really looking for ADA service. They're looking for demand response service, but they call it the paratransit van. And, that does cause confusion. So, yep.
You want to scroll down to the next page?
Yep.
Neil, you want to? Yeah, thanks.
So then,
there we go. There's scheduling.
Scheduling, that's another good point. And the scheduling we always talk about to people all over. You want to put that scheduling information in there. So how do you call? When do you call? What to expect when you call? And that's just really important so people know. And even, when we had Easterseals Project Action, you would not believe how many calls we got on scheduling and people not understanding how that works, and complaints about it. But this kind of lays it out. And then also they have in here in this box is they kind of break out the pickup window. And so the pickup window is that kind of allowance as to, you have a scheduled pickup time, but the transit system has an allowance to be arriving either a little bit early, in this case either up to 15 minutes early or 15 minutes later than that pickup time, and then you should be ready somewhere in that pickup window. So it's a kind of big bunch of times, but it makes it pretty clear to the rider when they need to be ready. And there's always been confusion about pickup windows with not only the riders and customers, but sometimes with drivers too. So sometimes drivers kind of feel like that that's too much time for me, et cetera, et cetera. But the driver doesn't have to sit there the whole time. The driver may arrive any time at that time. But drivers sometimes feel like they arrive early. They might have to wait till the scheduled time. But then we say to the driver, but no, there's a pickup window. The customer needs to be ready for that time. So sometimes there's confusion with drivers how that works. And then, under the ADA, there's just basically a suggestion that, drivers wait for at least 5 minutes, before departing without a person. So you want to give the person ample opportunity to be available and to board.
Mm-hmm. Well, I know in some places they have shared with their demand response riders, they have given them cell phones so that they can call them and remind them that they're coming, or before they leave. So if you're driving 60 miles to pick someone up, you don't get there and find out they got a different ride, or that once you're there in places where, like Nut Lake, where it might be cold in the winter, Jenny, you might not want someone standing out there.
Yep, that's a huge safety issue. I really looked into getting bus stops and, trying to, maybe streamline our routes, to get kind of people bunched up and congregated. And it was just not practical with this kind of weather, the winter. It was such a safety issue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know that the Umatilla have been putting in HVAC. They have an HVAC bus stop that they're installing at the Tribal Governance Center because it is so cold and then it's so hot. So having a safe and just safe as far as weather concerns and exposure, and especially I know a lot of the services really have a lot of elders are participating in the service, so it's important to be able to keep them safe too.
I think that's really, that's real important. Because, having safe places for people to wait, and really some thought through that. There's some issues. I remember, I think where it was, but it was south of Houston. It was south of Tucson, where people were outside waiting, and they said the air temperature had gone up to like 125 degrees. And what do you do with that to make sure people aren't standing out there for any long periods of time? So you need at least shade, but in some cases, need to be other things, like some kind of cooling fans or misters or something available for people to use while they're waiting.
Wow. So you can scroll down to the next page. Oh, now these are really important things.
Yes, real important. Yeah.
Because the thing is, you also have to report on, if you have a rider that is very inconsiderate of the service and of the no shows, you can't just say, oh, we've had enough of you. You have to have some policies here. So go ahead.
Yep. Yeah, no, and so what's great about this is it really shows the no-shows and defines what a no-show is when it occurs. So, you are required to schedule your ride in advance, but what basically transit is trying to say to people, if you're not going to be able to use that ride or you don't need the ride, at least, let us know that you can't ride. A no-show is when the van shows up, but you're not there. So the van really arrives for no person. And so generally what we try to tell transit, though, come up with a definition for your service, what a no-show really means, and so people know. So most cases people will say the van shows up within the pickup window or whatever. If you don't have a pickup window, you're a pickup time, and then it waits for 5 minutes or whatever your policy is. And then if no one shows up or we don't hear anything from you, it's a no-show. But you also want to make clear that there may be circumstances outside of the rider's control, and you want to let transit know or let the customer know they can notify transit when something happens why they can't take the trip. So it might be illness. There's a lot of cases of the illness where a person is scheduled. Sometimes they even go to the medical appointment or sometimes even go to work, but they get sick. So they had all intentions of making that trip, but it's one of those things. You wake up in the morning, you're getting ready to go, and I've done this, and you've gotten completely dressed, and you go, you know what, I really should stay home. I'm sick. Mm-hmm. And that's, that would be one of those cases, but it could be different things like emergencies. And sometimes one of the points made here that is really good, like an appointment where, like we were talking about dialysis, but it could be any other kinds of appointments where it runs much later than you expected. So the van shows up, but you're still in the examining room with your physician, when the van shows up. That's not your fault. You had good faith intentions of being there at the same time, but the physician ran late, and so you're still being examined, and you would let transit know. So they won't charge you a no-show. So, it's good to put that information there because, as far as calls we've gotten over the years is from customers disputing their no-shows, and they really have a lot of questions about when should that, no-show be charged against them. And so what we tell people is, you got to write down times, when they showed up, have some factual information, but also you need to understand when does that transit system count a no-show for you. So.
Right, and this looks like it's very detailed, and it's very important because if people lose their access to transportation, sometimes that is determining whether or not they can stay in their home. So I think it also is, if you think about Jenny, and if she were sending a bus out and she goes 120 miles with a driver in a van for a no-show, that is just a horrible waste of resources.
Yeah, that would
that person, they'd be lucky if that bus ever came again. But they would want to know that before they did something that crazy.
Yeah, and a lot of that responsibility falls onto the dispatcher calling and confirming, and then the driver calling or the dispatcher calling just before they get there, and then when they are in the parking lot. So there's a lot to follow up for that.
Mm-hmm.
And the key also, we say to people too, is that transit systems must have, some policy, and also let people know that they can appeal even proposed suspensions. Because when you think about how suspended transportation could affect somebody, there could be a huge economic impact for that person. Say if they're going to work or whatever, or health reasons, if they don't get their rides and you're not working, then the suspension could be disastrous for an individual. So, if somebody has some questions, yes.
I would have a really hard time personally suspending anyone for longer than a month.
Oh, yeah.
It would be good because you're creating more of the hardship that the transit is existing to relieve.
Exactly. And that's why I would agree with you 100%, because we always think about what's a reasonable, suspension. This organization does probably about as far as you can go, 5, 10, 15, 30, so they go to about the month. But when you think about it, even if you go, 15 days, that's just a long period of time not getting rides, for a lot of people. I mean, that could be the end. Yeah.
you might end up putting people on like a scheduling program so that you say, we need to have extra confirmation for if you're being suspended. Before we suspend you, we'll give you, X chances to show that you're able to respond and be a responsible user. Because I just think about all the people who need the service that don't have access or the limits of the service, and it's so important that people get it and that everyone is a good steward of the community resource.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that would be a good thing. I mean, and we always say, too, if they have somebody else involved in their lives that offer some kind of support to that person, they can help with, sort of reminders and things about, making their trips in a timely manner and helping people with that. And, and some people, it can be relatives, and some people actually work with some other, like, social programs or senior programs that could actually provide that assistance.
Okay, so we can scroll down. Oh,
so
this is great.
Yeah, this one has some good stuff too. We have the PCA, and then who is a PCA, and how that a PCA can ride with you, but also they list certain things a PCA might do for a person. The point also is made to people when they call that you can bring a PCA that may not do anything with your trip. So, the PCA may help you for your trip, but a PCA may also help you at the destination you're going on your trip, so they're going to ride along. So sometimes a PCA comes along because they're going to help with the medical appointment, with undressing and then helping working with the medical staff or whatever, or just being another person to understand instructions from the medical person. So they may come along to help with the other end of the trip. But it's nice to list that's available. It's part of the ADA. And then also kind of ran into that. If it was me, I'd probably separate it, but companions are also available to ride. And the whole idea of the companion rule was that, when people ride on regular fixed route public transit or transit in general, you kind of ride with, friends and whoever, family. And so they wanted to extend that same type of situation for people riding ADA transportation, so companions can ride along too. So. And then they got information out. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, the whole thing about this, a lot of this, what this does, if people haven't been using transit before, it sets up expectations. So this whole thing about fares and passes, that seems like it's really important in the rider guide to help people understand how payment happens, like how much is it, how do you pay for it. But go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, having this out in front really makes makes it more reasonable, I guess, for that individual looking for a ride too. To how do I do it? And how much does it cost? What are the limitations, et cetera, et cetera. So just having it all in one place, I think, just makes it so much easier for the transit system and also for that individual, because people aren't always going to call with their questions. So if they get a piece of paper that doesn't have that information, they look at it and they go, "What doesn't tell me? I don't know how the fare works, or I don't know, can I bring my friend with me?" They're going to say, "Maybe I won't use it. I'm not sure. I'm kind of confused." They're not going to call. If you have it in writing, so people can see it in one place, people may say, "Oh, now I understand. I can buy these fare passes." If I don't want to carry cash, that'll make it easy. And you can get stored value passes on this particular system or however it works, and they know the amount. People will say, "Oh, I can do this." So that's, I think, a real important way of actually marketing your system to people too. And one thing that we get questions about is that whole visitors policy. Actually, the ADA questions that FTA has gotten recently is that they said we're trying to get transit systems to make sure that people know the visitor policy should not be difficult. So I'm writing a technical assistance brief now that will be out by the end of the year, but it kind of explaining the visitor status. And what the original goal of the visitor status was for ADA paratransit is that if you had an ADA ID card from one transit system, you could ride as a visitor on another transit system anywhere in the country without going through eligibility, through the eligibility process. So you just call them and say, hey, I got an ID card, I want to ride and schedule a trip. And they say, sure, just show your ID card when we pick you up. You know, that was the idea. And other transit systems have gone into things where we have to get confirmation that you're an eligible rider from the transit system. They need to send us certified copies of the your eligibility, and we must receive it 2 weeks before you expect to ride. FTA has been saying, no, that wasn't our intention. Nobody needs to go through some process where we got to get some information 2 weeks before you need to ride, you know, have it certified by somebody. We want it simple. You show your ID, you get your ride. And so they said, you know, they're actually interested in technical information briefs I'm going to be writing to show that it's basic, simple information. You know, I'm eligible here, I need to ride there. And also I have information about the fact that if you're not eligible in your area for ADA paratransit, it might be because you don't have ADA paratransit. You're just a person with a disability. You can also ride as a person with a disability on another ADA paratransit service without eligibility, with just some certification. Might be a piece of paper that says you have a disability and you can ride. And that's another simple way without going through eligibility. So.
Hey, Ken and Robin?
Yes.
Yeah.
Hey, we had a question come in from Stacy. Why? Do you want me to unmute and let them speak?
Yeah.
Okay, Stacy, you're unmuted. Hello? Okay, I can read the question. It says, I've been told by FTA that a bus stop with a sign and post only does not prompt the 5x8 ADA pad requirements. Shelter, bench, trash can do prompt. But FHWA has suggested that any bus stop, even with a sign and post only, does prompt the requirement of a 5x8 firm landing. We use both types of funds, are a mostly rural provider with very minimal general infrastructure in many areas, and want to do what is right. We are seeking more guidance. Thanks.
So yeah, they're saying, you know, the accessible bus stop, we'll say it that way. The accessible bus stop is that 5x8 padded area, you know, with the bus stop sign, and that you have a level boarding area for a bus stop. Then, you know, there are people that say, as long as you have a firm, stable service for the bus, so you can have 5x8 area that's firm and stable for the bus to come on, and it might not be exactly the built pad, but it's firm and stable, and it's level, fairly level when you lower a ramp or when you lower the lift. It's still accessible for a person. That's still, you know, an accessible bus stop. Doesn't mean all the exact things, but it's firm and stable. You know, that's probably the words you want. The other thing around, you know, the bus stop's 5x8, and you have the landing area and the pad. In some places, what they're probably talking about, you don't have that unobstructed area exactly around the ramp perfectly. In some cases, you would say, well, it's not exactly accessible, but it's still a usable bus stop. You know, and, you know, in a lot of areas that are more rural, what you're looking at is that any place I can pull up that's firm and stable, that someone can board, that's my bus stop. Because you can't be digging up, you know, the road all over the place just to you know, put in bus stops in a lot of rural areas. And sometimes what you're looking for, it's a part of a shoulder of a road. and that's where some people board, or it could be in front of a small supermarket, which is just off the side of the road. There's just not even a fairly small parking lot, but it's still firm and stable. You use it as a bus stop, but it's still a bus stop that's usable. May not have all the exact attributes of an accessible bus stop, but for your system, it's going to work. And what I say to people a lot of times is, you're going to get money to put in those accessible bus stops when you can, down the line, have a plan to put in accessible bus stops. It may not be all your bus stops. You can't make them all accessible at one time. People still need a ride. That's not really reasonable. You're going to use what you have the best way you can for now, and you'll have a program and a plan to put in some accessible bus stops as you go forward. So, does that answer your question?
Sounds like it.
Yeah, if there's other questions, people are welcome to ask. We are open for business here if you have ADA questions and are around the accessible bus stops. One of the things is that you, as the transit manager, have a lot of information about trips taken in your area. So if you know where you have elder housing, or you have housing where people with disabilities are, oftentimes that housing may have different people living in it, but they are consistently people with disabilities because it's been built to make it more accessible. So that looking at when you're improving the hardscape, so you're putting in a accessible bus stop, looking at that as something that you're building on, you can sometimes look in your community and see, well, if I put one here at the grocery store, a lot of people will use it, and that'll make it a lot easier for us to help people. And then sometimes in a neighborhood, that'll be more clear that, oh, this house has got someone, and we're going to be moving them for the next 10 years or 15 years or 20 years. And that it becomes worthwhile just to put them places where you have trips pretty consistently. So does that scroll down?
Yeah, it scrolls down, and we can look down a little bit more on we got only a couple more pages. So yeah, and then this one here, you have service animals again, and the definition, and also they made the little distinction about the DOT. Oh, well, they just have DOT. They didn't have the DOJ. I was looking at another one that had DOJ regulations on the bottom. Like the DOJ regulations and the DOT regulations are not the same, meaning that DOJ, Department of Justice regulations, and it's where a lot of confusion is, the service animals are primarily dogs, and they don't recognize other animals that are not dogs. The only one they recognize that's not a dog for Department of Justice is a miniature horse as a reasonable modification of policy. But so whenever you hear that, isn't it service animal just a dog? That's the DOJ definition, and DOJ definition is applying to buildings. It's not applying to DOT or moving vehicles. So just keep that in mind if you hear that. The other thing, we had carry-on items. It's good to have that process. This organization is pretty lenient, where it's restricted to 5 bags that can be easily handled by the passenger and carried aboard without delaying the vehicle. There are some places where there's only a 2-bag limit. There's some, which I don't understand how they really want to do it. They say that the 2 bags have to be carried by the passenger, and I said, but you're doing ADA paratransit. You know,
It's like 2 coin purses. That is just crazy.
Right. It's exactly. And they go, well, our driver's not in the business of carrying packages. But I said, but you're doing paratransit. People need assistance, and, you have to provide assistance where you can. And so, they start thinking, oh, yeah, maybe that is correct. But, that's what some systems have done. They said the person must carry the 2 bags. Well, and then there's like the carts. They talk about baggages and packages. The question we get all the time is people that have a mobility device and then they add on to it. So you get a mobility device and people put, bags on the back of the wheelchair, or they put boxes and bags on the side of the wheelchair. And then you see other cases where people take one of those hand fold-out luggage carts, and they take them and they hold them onto the back, or they strap them onto the back of the wheelchair with bungee cords. And then they pile a bunch of stuff into that and carry it onto the bus. And that works some of the time. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it makes securement difficult. And other times all those packages that will block aisles or make it even not possible for that wheelchair to maneuver down an aisle. So, that's just, you got to come up with a policy that works for you. You can talk to people with disabilities. There's got to be some limit. When you add too much stuff to a wheelchair, it gets too wide. Sometimes it gets too long, and sometimes it gets too heavy. So that's got to be just part of your, policy to come up with something that's reasonable for you. Some places, they say as long as we can get them on, we get them on. If we have to take a few bags off, we do that. And they feel that's just part of the service they provide. So it depends where you are. I always hear those stories where I'm thinking of when I was in Alaska, and some of the tribal entities were saying that we allow at fishing season that people can at least bring, 2 fish unwrapped or fish in a cooler. And they said,
here we go.
They said, which sounds funny, but they said during fishing season, that's what people are doing. They're bringing the fish back home. So, they're going to bring coolers on, and they're going to bring fish even unwrapped. And then we say, just carry them on.
Yeah, we call lumber and everything.
Yeah.
A what?
Yeah. So, if somebody wants to run to town for a couple 2x4s, we just throw it in there.
Yeah.
I know my mom, when she was living in Salem, she had a garden, and so she got them to go up there and take her up to the Fred Meyer and get some dirt.
Oh!
Perfect.
That worked.
Yeah, that's great. So anyway, so you got to come up with your own policy as to what you can carry and what's reasonable. And I think it's reasonable in big, expansive rural areas. Sometimes if you have the space, you may have to carry some fairly large items because, for people that may make that trip once, a month or once every couple of months, getting that big item home, it's really important. If you can do it, it really helps.
Yeah. Well, I also see the seatbelt policy, which is interesting because that is a really important part of the ADA, but it also is an issue with safety on these smaller buses. So I know that in general, the rule is if everybody has to wear the seatbelts, then you can request that everybody includes people in chairs. Yes.
So right. So you're not being discriminatory if you if you have, say, people with disabilities with wheelchairs and wear seatbelts and people sitting in the regular seats are not wearing seatbelts, then you're being discriminatory in saying that the person with disability needs a seatbelt, or extra protection or something. It's not the same. But if you say for everyone, then it's fine. And there's, in some places, they do have mandatory seatbelts, even in especially smaller transit vans and cutaways. There's places where the state law now says that even with public transit, unless it's a full-size transit bus, people must wear seat belts. So that's cropping around here and there. So.
Yeah, they're putting them into motor coaches, and they're, you know, it's something when, I mean, we are a very safe mode, and not very many people are hurt on a transit bus, but you do have some really vulnerable people sometimes, and so having a good safety policy is important.
Yeah, Robin, we just reached 60 minutes.
Okay. Let's go to the last page and see the last thing, and then if people have questions, please raise your hand. Ooh. Oh, this is good.
Yeah. So we got, the mobility aids and all the kinds. They have the legitimate safety requirements, so they have the sort of the new view for the mobility device. And so, you know, as long as it fits the ramps that you have or the lifts that you have on your vehicles, they'll carry it. You know, a lot of vehicles now, it used to be everything we used to run before. When I was in operations, we only had 600-pound lifts. Now, even on cutaways, you can get 800-pound lifts. And people are recommending that you get bigger lifts if you can, so you can carry a bigger and heavier mobility, larger chairs, right? And but if you got equipment that can handle it, then the FTA DOT ruling was that I think it's the DOT rule more than FTA, said that you know, if it fits and you got the equipment, you must carry it. And the legitimate safety requirements, basically, it's not so big that it's going to block aisles or you can't really get it into the vehicle and secure it properly. You know, some mobility devices so big they can't hardly make a turn into the securement area. And then some of them were so long you get them in the securement area but can't secure it because there's no room for the securement. Right. You know, what basically they're saying, though, if it fits in there, then, you know, then it's not in the way, it's not in the aisle, then you have to carry that person in that mobility device. So it's good to have that in the, yes.
Well, one of the things that I know one of the operators that we've worked with brought up is an issue around hygiene, that you go to pick someone up, and it's not just smell, but I know that they had an issue with this person having bugs crawling on their chair. Mm-hmm. I know, it was... I know. But the thing is, that's another place where if you have policies, like I see that they have hygiene on here, and really the point is not to kick people off, but then if you have someone that has those problems, that you're able to work with them or their family to get them access to adequate care, because that's not safe. If you have bugs crawling on your chair, there's an issue with your personal safety.
Exactly.
Okay, I have a question. This is Jenny. You know, it's fine to write a policy, and you know, that's always our fallback, because you know, if we have it in a written policy, then you know, like you were saying earlier, if we do it for one, we do it for everyone, and that's excellent. But what's a boots on the ground, for lack of a better thing? How would you handle that situation? Would you go ahead and try to make a social services review or referral, or how would you handle that, Ken?
Yeah, I mean, if it was for me, you got bugs, I would try to at least find out if there's somebody, you know, that works with that person or knows that person and could go say, you know, do they have bugs in their house? One time, I remember years ago, we transported somebody, and they would occasionally have roaches drop out of their wheelchair.
Oh my goodness.
You know, they would, because, and then, so we found out there was a person that was a case manager that worked with this person. It would take a little bit of finding out, but the individual that had roaches in their wheelchair said, I work with this woman who's my case manager. So we said, oh, okay, we'll give her a call. And it was nice, they offered that information. So we called the case manager, and they actually went to the house, and the whole kitchen is full of roaches, basically.
Oh.
So, yeah, and then that's why he had roaches in his wheelchair, because the roaches said were everywhere. And so they, of course, they said they called the housing authority, and the housing authority gets some advice, and then they got the health department, but they could get somebody actually come in, an exterminator, to come in, without costing that individual, to at least do an initial assessment and spraying on the roaches. And then they, had to work with, the roaches were actually, long story, came from like 2 doors down from our other rental property that was not this particular one, but the roaches were making their march down through all the other units, so it became a bigger issue with the landlord. But this particular housing unit, the housing area was getting federal money, so they had some other options for that.
So it looks like we're at the end of our hour together, and what we can do is download this document and put it with the recording of this webinar or this peer call. It'll be in the peer call section when we post that, so that you all on the phone can look at these examples. And if you have questions, you're welcome to call us, call Ken, and ask him about this, because these are important ways for you to invite your partners to the program and to use your service. And Jenny?
Yes, I'm here. I was sneezing.
Okay. So one of the things Jenny and Neil and I have been working on, looking at issues that would be helpful for tribal transit programs to have in their desk books. And so we'll schedule the next call in about 3 months. And if you have issues that you want addressed or you're concerned about with your program, just send us an email. Ask Jenny or Neil or I. And actually, Ken works for the National Aging and Disability Transportation Center, and they like questions too.
Yes.
So this is an invitation for everybody to use the resources that are made available for you as a transit operator. And I really thank Ken Thompson. He filled in for Carol at the last minute, but he has such great experience dealing with the reality of, as Jenny said, when the boots hit the road. Is that right? The boots on the ground.
Boots on the ground, yeah.
When the rubber hits the road, how do you?
That's right. That's the transit one.
Yeah. Well, we're hopefully all on the right route to good writer guides and community invitations. So, Neil, you have, how long does this take for? Is it like a week before we get these posted, or how does that work?
I say give it a week.
Okay.
Very good.
Yeah. So, and please, we'll put up a hard copy of the notes that we took during this that have the links in them, so that you can look at the writer guides that we were looking at. Thanks. Thank you, everybody, and have a good afternoon and a wonderful holiday.
Thank you.
Bye.